Welcome everyone to another FHIR Work Group meeting while we're doing ballot reconciliation period. And today we're going to be going through the AU-based content. I'm just going to share my screen so that we can see the agenda for today. I think that's big enough for everyone. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Looks good.
All right. So we're going to go through and look at the minutes of the last call. They were sent round for review. We'll give an update around ballot reconciliation and look at the e-vote, which what was the topic of that e-vote again, Brett?
That's a very good question. It was.
Was this the one around meeting times? No.
Oh, no. This was actually the issues. That's an issues booklet. Yeah, the meeting times.
Okay. What if I put that in the chat?
Yeah.
We can go through it and actually we might do that. We might see if we can complete the vote in this call.
Those are non-persuasive or non-persuasive with mod issues in a block. Yeah. So they were sent out.
Okay. So there would be something else around our meeting times during.
Oh, yeah. We did that already.
Okay. So that was an electronic vote. That's passed already, and we've reported the results in a meeting.
No, we have not reported the results, so we should do that.
Okay, so we'll add that to the agenda to just confirm
the
that.
The fact that you're here means you must have known something, because I emailed it out because we're adjusting the time of this meeting by not moving it for the Victoria and New South Wales, but moving it for Queensland. But yes, it was completed last Friday.
Right, we'll do a quick run through in as part of the updates. Although there isn't another updates and news section, we might also add one just to confirm if there are any others. And then otherwise, in terms of the agenda, it is all around ballot reconciliation. What's up first is one of the ones from the last call that didn't get done. Then we've got, which is 52564 on removing time from the extension. We've got one that was referred from AU call, and I think referred is actually probably the wrong word. This was created as an upstream issue to reflect the preferred decision from AU core to move some guidance into AU base. There is also this that we'll have to look at, which I don't actually think that that's up to this group to resolve, though it can be considered in the resolution of this one, if that's what that is intended to be.
Yeah, there's Michael Wilson. I think there's a few other coaches here too from e-requesting. There was a request that they had that ticket that was related, and maybe we could think about what that meant. Yep.
Okay, so we can have a look at that, whether or not the proposed resolution of this ticket already addresses anything that's necessary, or if there are some suggested amendments to that in order to address what e-requesting needs. Then we have this item around the AU Patient Internal Identifier data type profile, looking at the title and definition, improvements there. There's this one around considering creating the AU recorded sex or gender code system. And then there is 2 items on task business status. I think that is all our items for the agenda. So I'd like to open that up for confirming the agenda. Are there any items that people would like to add to the agenda, or any reordering of the agenda that people need? All right, I'm not hearing any. So let's go into our first item then. And our first item is approval of the minutes of the last call. These were sent round for review. We had a very pitiful attendance. at our last call, so perhaps it's good that we did not actually approve too many things in that call. What is listed here, we have the agenda, we have the recording linked, and then here are the minutes. Largely, I think it was discussion. There were a couple of items that were reconciled, or really it was just this one item that came to a resolution, which was that Brett retracted this particular ticket based on the discussion. The rest was some progression on particular items with a set of actions to do some work in between that meeting and this meeting so that those could be so that we could actually make, I guess, resolutions on those particular items around task business status in this call. Does anyone need any more time to review these minutes before we look to approve? Not hearing anyone. Would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the last call?
I will.
I'll second you.
Okay, so Dushi has motioned, Brett, you've seconded. Any other questions or comments while we move to the poll for approval? Okay, you should see the poll for approval of the previous minutes, affirmative, negative, or abstain. If you can either not see the poll or you can see the poll but you can't click anything, put your vote in the chat. If you can't see either the poll or the chat, please say your name and whether you are affirmative, negative, or abstain. I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I will end that poll and share the results and someone posted in the chat. Let me just bring that up. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I was +1 affirmative.
Okay, just struggling a bit with buttons. Alrighty then. So with what is in the chat, we have a total of 7 affirmative, 0 negative, 3 abstain. The motion carries. The minutes are approved. Okay, thank you, everyone. So the next item should be to go through our action items that are open. The action items are, well, in this meeting minute, so I'm just going to keep these open. Looking at this, do you want to talk through the first couple, Brett?
Okay, which ones are we looking at? We're looking at
The first was to publish a triage page.
Triage page. Oh yes, that is published. So I'll drop the link in the chat. That will be good. We do that. Nice.
Okay, and the next one is for you to retract. This is the item that was advertised in the last meeting to retract and add a short note in the JIRA explaining why. That looks like that's done.
Yeah, that's been completed.
The next one we don't have a deadline on, but is Michael Osborne on the call?
Indeed.
Do you have an update for us on that one yet?
No, I was going to wait till publication.
All right, no worries. Next one is, I think this is the item around task business status and working that through. Was this right, Brett? This next action item?
Yeah. Yes, we had. In fact, that's those 2 items in a row there are related. So we had our meeting. We had a meeting with Michael and Richard and myself, and that's what's in the item today. So we've got the drafted content there. So we did that.
All right. Next one then is on Michael Wilson, who I don't think is on the call at the moment, to take these 2 updated resolutions to the e-requesting TDG for comment, which I think are actually these to updated task business statuses. Is there anyone on the line who can comment on whether or not that action was undertaken? As in, has it been discussed at a recent e-requesting TDG? All right.
What, it's hard to know what from just the number.
This is task business status. So it's the task status
okay.
reason and
Yep.
other ones on. There was, I think, a meeting with Brett,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
where the change.
And what was the other number? Sorry, there was two numbers in that sentence.
It was then this one.
Okay.
Basically the same thing.
Yep. I think we got to the conclusion that we were willing to change to category.
No, not that one. No, this one was just task business status, codes and display and definitions. So it's actually in today's agenda, the outcome of the meeting that Richard and Michael and I had around those two tickets.
Okay.
And really it's rewording stuff. And yeah.
Can we come back to that one? Because it'll be in our triage page. There'll be a
the question is simply, were the updates socialized with the e-requesting TDG? That's the action. Which I know you're going to go through the updates in today's.
I think it's fair to say yes,
Okay.
without going into further detail on what that discussion resulted in.
All right, I'll tick that one.
Yeah. So I think that's they're right. Those two are on today. The rewording tickets. So I think we will get a chance to talk about them after.
Sounds good. And I think the next one, although it hasn't been ticked, was done, and that's AU base block vote 1. Would that be right, Brett?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that was done last week. Yep.
Okay, so that's the action items. In terms of a status update, would you like to provide that, Brett?
Sure. So I don't have any hard numbers, but I think we've triaged all of the issues that initially came to us. We do have yep, we have that sorted. There is a page there under there with some common issues, and I think we still have to work through those ones. So there's some ones that affect all the groups. So they're going to be brought to the work group to discuss as well. So they're things that where there's common content across multiple IGs. So we'll need to, I think those might need to be triaged because I don't think we've formally done that as co-chairs. So those will come through. I think there's 2 issues there. Other than that, I think we are tracking along. So really now we need to get through our, we have a set that went to the block vote. So that was block vote 1. There was a set of non-persuasive things. It's probably worth just talking about that now. That's running through until the end of the week. So you've got 2 more days after today to vote on those ones. There haven't been many responses on those yet, so we'll try and drum up some more consideration there because that's probably not enough people voting on it to decide things. So yeah, so we'll circulate that around again to people. But yes, if you haven't had a look, please do, and see if there's anything you want to pull out to teleconference or want to vote on. That would be very good. Other than that, we've got everything else, I believe, has been scheduled to meetings. I have to confirm that, but we will we'll be working on that.
This page would have the list
yeah,
and which
should have a
meeting
list.
things are scheduled for.
Yep. So you can see some are scheduled for the 22nd, but we haven't got the meeting page sorted yet.
Okay.
I think that's it. Yep.
Alrighty, back to in terms of updates then, are there any other updates or news that we need to share? All right, if nobody has any, there's nothing else coming from HL7AU, then we should move on into ballot reconciliation. All right, let's move on to the first item. This first item on remove time from extension, Australian time zone usage context. Who's speaking to this one?
I think this is Heath's ticket. I'm very happy to talk to it.
All right.
Heath, yeah.
I think that Heath has been, I think you've had a conversation with Heath about that. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, so I think so just to lay out what the ticket was, basically we for this ballot we've switched to using the international time zone extension, which is a standard one, HL7 extension. We have also profiled that to include Australian time zones explicitly. So that's actually was replacing our own localized extension that did a similar thing. That was voted on and agreed and has gone in to the spec. And Heath raised an issue around the content of that. So since we have inherited the international extension, we have essentially got that definition in place. So I'll just I'll share my screen here. Okay. That is the wrong screen. There we go. Hopefully you can see a JIRA ticket.
Yes.
Cool. So the so the time zone extension is this one. So primarily it's just providing a time zone value from our time zones, and we've actually added a profile in AU-base to just restrict that code system down to Australian time zones. So it's where you want to apply Australian states and territories time zones. Heath's queries are about the context of use. So since we're using the international spec, we inherit its use against the time data type. So that is in fact defined as in the international time zone extension, and we just inherit these uses, context of use. So Heath was saying he didn't think that was right, as the time data type indicates a time zone should not be present. So time context should be removed from the extension. I think our position on that was, in fact, that is the reason. I think that is the reason we are using the time zone extension, is that there is no time zone supported by time. So one of the reasons you want to actually use this extension is to add the time zone where it's applicable. So this is like a profiling choice to add time zone capability there. In fact, one of the key uses is to be able to do time zones on opening hours for healthcare services is one of the uses we have for this. So in fact, we do want to do time zones there because we want people to be able to state exactly the time they open and close, including a time zone.
Right, we'll time box this to 5 more minutes.
Yeah. So basically it's just non-persuasive because we think that's not a good rationale, and we are inheriting the international one. So there's actually a problem there. Tickets need to go to international anyway to change that. So we wouldn't do that. So that was one part of it. The other part was there was a query on its use with the meta element. That again is inherited. So again, we would say that is something to be taken up with the international definition. I can say it's not entirely clear how that works, but I think it's mainly because meta's a data type, and so it's applied against this data type, and I suspect that's putting the whole data type in that time zone, and so that lets you perhaps qualify things in here in a time zone. So yeah, it's not a common use that we have, and we haven't really got into changing anything. But again, if there was queries about that
3
and the
minutes.
use of that, we would put it across to the international to decide. So that's basically it. So we have a non-persuasive resolution here. I would recommend we just go with non-persuasive. Heath knows what's happened, and I think I would raise a motion that we mark this as non-persuasive. Any discussion?
I second the motion.
Okay, Brett
Okay.
has motioned that this is non-persuasive as described in the resolution description. That's been seconded by Richard. Are there any comments or questions or things that people would like a further walkthrough? Not hearing any. I'm going to go to the poll. I will launch that for the current motion. You should now see that in front of you. Please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain.
It's optional, isn't it, Brett? Like to use it.
It's yeah, you just decide when you want a supply time zone where one's not possible. Yeah.
Okay,
It's just
counting down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll end the poll. I will share the results. With what is in the chat, we have 10 affirmative, 0 negative, 1 abstain. The motion carries. Alrighty, on to the next
Let's put
item.
it on screen. Yeah.
Since you're already sharing, I think this is actually yours as well, Brett, if you're happy to keep. Okay.
I'll keep going. Yeah. Cool. So, okay. Originally, there was a ticket raised in AU Core. So just to go over what's happened there was a ticket that was my ticket as well about relocating there's some guidance in AU Core around body site and laterality and how that can be used and some guidance on how approaches to using that. It's a informative section on the what we consider like the best way to apply that. That information is pretty much not an AU. It's not related to AU Core profiling or sort of must support usage and things like that. So it is more general in nature, and the suggestion was to move that to AU base as general guidance. It's appropriate, wherever those resource types are used, and so that was discussed in AU Core and agreed that should happen. So the action then was to create a ticket on AU base to bring that content into AU base, and then AU Core can essentially refer to it as they have decided in their ticket. So the premise is to bring in the material that is, and basically it's just to ensure the words are general in nature and don't refer to AU Core directly, and have the material listed in the AU-based guidance section. So that's in fact raised as a separate ticket.
You're doing me or David McKillop
Yeah,
with all the tabs open.
I don't have quite as many, but the yeah. So that was basically the premise here. So bringing that the resolution here is to bring that in, and change the wording appropriately so it refers to AU base, and then yes, just do adjustments, and there was actually a suggestion which was the e-requesting ticket that was related to that. There is a ticket from e-requesting which also is requesting guidance and information there about laterality and use with service request. The guidance would be the same. So there was a request here to add a guidance section. As we bring it into AE base, we also have service request, our own service request profile in AE base. The advice here would be applicable to that as well. So we would essentially add service request into the described scope of use. So that would be a change to add that in. So rather than just finding and procedures coding, we will also do finding procedures and service coding in general, and that would then be included as well as a usage. The examples we have are really just on condition, I think, anyway. So we don't have examples of everything, but it does show the methodology which can be applied across service code as well. So yeah, that's about it. I guess if there's anything to add.
I'm having trouble putting up my hand, but would there be specific guidance on using body site in diagnostic requesting, or would it be more general?
It would be more general. So I'll show you.
I mean, in principle, in base,
cool.
it would be in general. If a specific downstream implementation guide has some particular sets of guidance they would use, of which AU Core will have a couple of items that it would retain, they would live within the downstream IG, but the generic guidance would live in base.
Yeah, so the resolution actually, like this, would remain in AU Core, and this section below would move to AU base and be redirected to AU base, and we would add service as well here. And like refer to the profiles. So we'd add service request to this profile. We only have condition examples. That's all that's been in this section ever. And it goes through multiple scenarios. So there's actually 4 different scenarios that are gone through.
5-minute
really
warning.
It's really just a usage of code and body site and how they interact and how do you apply things. So that would be the change.
Okay, thank you, Brett. Comments or questions, or anything else that people would like to go into more detail on? Not hearing anyone. Would anyone like to make a motion?
I will make a motion to accept the resolution and make this change.
Thank you, Brett. Would anyone like to second?
I'll second it, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. Are there any other comments or questions while I move to find the poll? Okay, I will be relaunching that poll now. Okay, so you should see that poll in front of you, I hope. And I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm going to end that poll and I will share the results. And with what is in the chat, we have 7 affirmative, 0 negative, 2 abstain. The motion carries. Okay, thank you. what is on our, well, like while you're sharing, just in case the next item is also something that you're talking to, Brett, what is the next item?
Cool. Yes. So patient internal identifier.
Okay, I believe this
might
is what
be
Ruben has submitted,
again.
and Ruben's
Yeah.
on the line. Ruben,
Yep.
would you like to speak to the nature of this issue and or share your screen?
I shouldn't need to share my screen. I'm just trying to refresh my mental cache to know what this was about. Okay, so yeah, I found this a little bit. Well, first I'm going to start by saying this was an affirmative vote item. I'm not going to die on the hill over this one. I just thought that patient internal identifier is very likely to be misunderstood in terms of what it actually is, because it doesn't make it's just not very clear, basically. Now I know that the V203 table refers to it as that as well, but I've actually discussed this in THO meetings where we also agreed that's not a great name, but it's what they chose at the time. So the description of our profile is that the identifier is assigned to a patient by an application as opposed to an organization. But the structure includes an assigner element, which seems a bit odd because it's a reference to an organization. And the description actually states the organization that assigned the patient internal identifier. My read and understanding of the semantics of this thing is that the application assigns it. So to make that clearer, my suggestion was to rename the profile as AU patient application identifier and add a clarifying note that the assigner refers to the organization responsible for the application, thereby removing all ambiguity. Happy to take questions.
I'm happy with everything except 2. I'm not quite sure what 2 means. Add a clarifying note that the assigner value refers to the organization responsible for the application which assigned the identifier.
Yeah, so
the assigner being the system you're the organization assigned.
So the identifying question is always assigned by an application. That's the first point. However, our profile has an assigner element in it, which is a reference to an organization. So it's thus not clear whether it's the organization assigning the identifier or the application. That point 2 seeks to clarify that by saying that the assigner that's part of this profile is actually the organization that's responsible for the application, which assigned the identifier.
But so if you give like the best practice example, so there's the organization best practice, and there's Brown Street Surgery running their application, and it's a unique identifier for Brown Street Surgery. So we're talking about, is the assigner Brown Street Surgery, or is it best practice?
So in that example, Brown Street Surgery is the organization that's responsible for the application. And the application in that sense is the instance of best practice running at Brown Street Surgery.
Yep. So I get that. And that's what so we're aligned there. So add a clarifying note that the assigner value refers to the organization responsible for the application.
Probably needs the word instance there.
Even that's, instance, because even that's unclear, because is best practice responsible for the application, or is Brown Street Surgery responsible for that?
Fair point. That too is ambiguous, as I've put it forward there. It should be responsible for the application instance.
Isn't the issue here? It's internal to what? And that was the problem with an internal identifier. Is it internal to an organization, or internal to an application instance, internal to an application class? And
yes, there's a lot of problems here. I read this to be internal to an application instance.
Right.
But if the intent of this profile is something else.
Because the other model we're trying to straddle here is, as we kind of know, there's best practice where it's unique per surgery instance, but then there's like a Magenta's type thing where it's unique across their entire application sitting in the cloud servicing many surgeries, So it's internal to one instance called Magenta's, and it's unique across everything, or it's internal to Brown Street surgery and only unique within that scope, such as the best practice example. And maybe, are we doing too much by trying to include both? I don't know.
Maybe. I certainly wouldn't mind dropping suggestion, the second
But I guess
suggestion
it is
point.
still instance, isn't it?
I
It's
think
still
it is
instance. Like
instance.
there's one
Yeah.
instance of Magenta's Gen 2,
Yeah.
and there's one instance of Brown Street surgery's best practice. So
Yeah, but the only thing that we get to create the leverage point is the assigner. So it would make much more sense if we had somehow a link to a application instance identifier, kind of ID.
concept of an
Rather,
application.
the problem is once it's if the only thing you're providing is the organization reference, then you kind of are implying that
they run one instance.
Yeah.
They might run many instances. Queensland Health might run many instances of best practice.
Yeah, exactly. And all of if they were to use this profile, then the assigner element will have a reference to Queensland Health or an HHS or a facility or something. But I think the key point here is that it's an identifier assigned by an instance of the application in question.
So we'll go to Michael Osborne, and I think just to further clarify the point of this ticket is the ticket that was raised is about making sure the description and the title reflect accurately what the intention is. So we're not, intending to necessarily change the identifier. It needs to be understood by the implementer community what it is. Maybe that is going in the direction Ruben suggested, or maybe there will be an argument to say, but everybody knows it by this other term. There's all sorts of things that we might need to work through there.
That was going to be my point too. That was my exact point is because it does align with PI in V2, and that's its whole purpose is to have this thing in FHIR that matches PI for orders, that now we're actually moving it away from that alignment. So anything that makes that less clear, I think is not a good thing. And secondly, the point around how to describe this thing, this profile, we went round in circles on this for weeks and weeks, and that's what we came up with. And I don't think this makes it any clearer. That's my position on it.
Do you not think there will be people less familiar with V2 that will read a title of AU Patient Internal Identifier and think that it's internal to the organization instead of internal to the application?
I think by its nature it is. Because it is internal and solely defined by the organization as to the scope of the uniqueness of that identifier. Because
disagree. It's not even necessarily unique. You could have these things which are the same identifier in different applications and different applications in different organizations. The context of uniqueness is the application instance. That's the semantic of something like this.
It is, but we have no way of identifying that context, so you would never know.
Well,
because the only thing we have is the organization as the assigner, not the application within the organization as the assigner. So unless we introduced something to represent the application, so you could then understand that. I understand what you're trying to do. I'm just not sure that the structure of this identifier enables that.
It's about granularity of organisation, right? Like if you just said Queensland Health, then it's not going to work. But if you said Queensland Health's Brown Street surgery, then the instance there.
Well, I mean, to your earlier point, Angus, even that's not really good enough because an a particular organization could have tens or hundreds of instances of the same application. Andy's got a point here. There's nothing here that's an element that identifies the application instance, and that's sort of one of the intrinsic problems here. The reason I raised this issue is that if someone's looking at data that has an instance of this profile and the identifier, that they couldn't really be blamed for thinking this is an organizational identifier like an EMPI identifier or something, when in fact it's something very internal to the application that created.
I think we have to, on that point, Ruben, though, we have to clarify that on the wire, there's no reference back to this profile because it's a data type profile. What actually gets represented is whatever is on the wire format, which will be, the code that we've assigned, which is allowed anyway.
True.
The structure in AU base is trying to put together a set of usage information around how, I suppose, really how that usage might be undertaken within Australia. So I think we just need to be careful not to conflate consumers of the identifiers that might be confused because they won't know it's this profile.
True. However, I guess the concern then raises with misunderstanding of people adopting this profile in specifications.
Fair. Richard, your hand's been up.
Yeah, I mean, maybe part of what we've got here is this is a profile to allow people to do a V2 thing. And so to perhaps leave the title as a very V2 oriented title, but in the description, make it clear this is about doing a V2 thing. And the V2 thing only partially does what you'd like it to do, and make those things clear in the description. So I'm sort of tempted towards saying, if we want to make it visible to V2 people, then maybe we need to leave the title as it was, but we need to make the description clear enough so that somebody who doesn't know about V2 comes here and realizes those limitations that people experience with V2 are aware of.
I would like to make an alternative suggestion to all of this. I think it's the same group of people. All of us have now spent hours discussing what this is. And I think part of is the description and the title useful enough for the community? I would suggest that we should put a Zulip poll out or in some way actually reach out to the community that isn't us who keep having this discussion in order to answer that question. If it seems to be understood enough by the people we think need to implement, then we leave it. If there is some confusion or suggestions, then I think that's an indicator that we can clarify it. That's probably my suggestion.
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
So that would mean if we go down that pathway, we wouldn't vote on it today. We would put out a Zulip post. Who would like to craft that? Personally, I don't think I'm the best person to craft the wording on that, to check in on whether or not this is appropriate.
I feel like we need voices from best practice and medical director who do this at scale today. That's what it's catering for. Like, it's those two.
Well, certainly those two, but I imagine that there are many applications that have internal patient identifiers.
Kestrel's old pathology system did this as well, but the real lion's share of it is those two.
And hospital systems.
And not here, but it's a bit like, so if you're not going to have this in the future, what are you going to do? And if that you can't live with that, then what is the assigner? You think is, do you have something to identify each of your systems at each site?
I mean, the key aspect of them being unique identifiers is the value of system. So how much value is there in organization? Isn't the key value for making this thing unique in what you stick in system?
I think, Brett, you've told me your hand is up, even though you can't actually access it how you're logged in.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I care enough. But
Well, you can tell me you put your hand down.
No, but I think, I think the description attempts to kind of say what it's trying to do, and I think there's really no real, like, at the end of the day, uniqueness of identifiers is managed by implementation, and I kind of think that's still true for this as well. So I don't see why this needs to have guarantees the same as,
No,
MRN doesn't have
it doesn't.
guarantees.
It doesn't need guarantees. I think
Yeah.
the only issue as I see it, or issues, are what's meant by the assigner in this context, and also whether the title of the profile is potentially confusing. If the Zula poll should be about that, I think.
We're missing is that the only clutch is we don't know what the assigner would be populated with, and it works today
what
as
it means.
it's an echo back. You gave me this identifier and giving it back to you, and that's kind of how it works.
Yeah.
Do we need the assigner?
Can I summarize here? You can't. Okay, that is a different jury issue.
Yeah, it
this is FMM1. It isn't there through the maturity level. This is an initial proposal out for people to attempt to implement and provide feedback back. So I don't. It's not necessarily inappropriate that these are the kinds of questions that arise out of that. I think to move forwards, I hear two concerns from you, Ruben. Both, do people actually understand what it is who need to implement it? And then there are others who don't actually need this, but might mistake it for something else and unintentionally use it. Is that about right?
Yep.
And so I guess to work out whether or not the title and the description is appropriate to address those two concerns, Angus has raised who this is really for, who we can check with to say that if you're implementing this, does this do you understand this? Does it work? And I guess then there's the other question of the people who aren't actually, or probably shouldn't be implementing this, but might mistake it for something like, I don't know, one of the other kind of patient identifiers.
What do you think someone's going to mistake this as? Like, clearly say it's not an MRN.
Yeah. And something like a statewide EMPI identifier. Internal is a very variable term. It can mean internal to an organization or to an application. So that's the concern I have.
Hopefully they read the description before they invest so much money in using it.
Well,
it does say a patient identifies a patient application that is not intended to be broadly shared with other applications. It doesn't sound like an MP.
So how do we want to move forward?
Because you really, the only difference between this and just a vanilla identifier is that we're putting the type PI on it, right? Otherwise, it's just a vanilla identifier, right? You could say, oh, let's not do this at all. They're just identifiers with assigners who beat your heart out. Good luck. The only thing we're adding here, only value we're adding here is putting PI on an identifier. That's all we're doing. We're arguing about that means.
Yeah. So Danielle, before we go to a decision on the Zula poll, can I suggest a straw poll of hands of anyone who thinks we actually have an issue here? Because if no one or very few people think there's even an issue here, I'm willing to withdraw this.
Okay, so what is now open, please put your hand up or type in the chat if you would like to say that we should be reconsidering the title and the description of the profile in line with Ruben's concerns. I'm just going to leave that open for a bit. I do think that says conclusive.
That speaks volumes. I shall withdraw and save us all and the community a lot of time. Thank you.
Okay, you're happy to retract that.
Yep.
All right, no worries. So we'll note that in the minutes that Ruben will retract that, and we'll list that as an action item, and we can confirm that we have that status at the next call. Okay, on to the next item. Which is also Ruben.
Yay. All right then.
You gonna withdraw
okay.
this one, Ruben?
No, this one I am not inclined to withdraw. So a bit of preamble before I get to my action on this one. As I said in the last FHIR Work Group call where we discussed this item, I was waiting on some feedback from NCTS just in relation to adding additional SNOMED CTAU concepts for the National Infrastructure Systems and Services, which would be concepts under this tracker item. I got some very clear feedback from Matt Cordell, who said that we definitely don't want to put them in SNOMED CTAU, and he even questioned why the other ones that are there for the air and other registers are there. He doesn't believe SNOMED is the right place for them. He'd much rather see them in our FHIR code system. So that's the first bit of feedback. I'll just pause for any discussion or questions on that. All right, Danielle, can I share my screen so that I can just display what I've done with respect to this tracker item?
Just a comment on that comment from Matt Cordell. So that sounds like an idea that SNOMED is not the best place to represent a range of codes that we've got there. That sounds like something we'd be interested in having as a SNOMED Australia position on what sorts of things do and don't go in there.
Perhaps.
I think that should be taken through NCTS. Part of that is because they're the original advice from NCTS approximately 9 years ago was to add those codes and that they could. I realise that things change over time.
Yeah, it sounds like a change of policy from them. Yeah,
concepts and the hierarchy was the advice from the team at the time that this would be how those concepts could and should be represented for Australia.
Yeah, I think part of what Matt said was that those concepts are not clinical. I know there's a lot of other non-clinical stuff in SNOMED, but yeah,
I don't necessarily agree with that. They've got jurisdictions and all sorts of things. The SNOMED CTAU set has really expanded to be concepts useful for the provision of healthcare data, and that gets real wide.
Yeah. Right. So my action from last week was to craft a value set of the proposed values, which I think we need to start with in any case. And I've done a branch in AU base with some suggested approaches for this. And this is the value set. Obviously, I don't have SNOMED, so I had to create a FHIR code system for these things. And for now, and following the discussion last week, the value set has the HI service, APRA, Medicare, and the NHSD. This is what it would look like. And just in terms of linking it to RSG, it would be done very much the same way as source document type. You can't have a binding here, but you do have invariants or constraints. This is what the one for patient would look like. So it's just saying that the RSG source shall be a member of the value set I just displayed, and it's extensible. It'll be a very similar treatment for practitioner and related person, and the sex and gender page would need some additional content just referring to the source being populated from that value set. And just for completeness, I added an example of what this would look like as well on the sex and gender page. So it's this element down here, and that's showing an example with the HI service. I think where we've got, I guess, essentially one question to answer here, and that is, are we comfortable to put the code system and corresponding value set in AU base in the same way we've done with RSG source document type, or do we want to do something else? Brett.
Thank you, Ruben. Oh, yes, Brett.
I don't think I want HL7 Australia to own this problem because it needs maintenance, and
Well,
I think it's more of a Health Connect issue about how to identify
oh, it's much broader than
entities.
Health Connect.
Yeah,
It's
but
basically anyone that's getting a sex or gender value from these systems and want to represent it in RSG elements based on how we've standardized the use of RSG. And the same
yeah, but an
argument
option
about
is,
maintenance
yeah,
applies to the source
You don't-
document type and various
you-
other things as
you
well.
don't need to use code though to do that. You can do it by reference to
To what?
what's the definition?
Well, it can be a reference to an organizer. I'll just bring it up actually.
Yeah,
So I think Brett's
source,
talking about, is it organization identifier? Is
yeah,
that what
or
you're
device,
thinking?
or device. They're
device.
systems. Yeah,
No, they're not.
systems.
They're actually services, government agency operated services with
They're
legislation. They are not devices.
What
Yep.
are they then? Are they applications?
So
They're
there
devices.
are administrative business processes that create records for people in the
Yeah, but you're getting
HI
it from
service, in Medicare.
Are you getting it from
Well,
a
you might.
system?
Well,
Or
you
is
might be
it the
getting it from a
entity, the
system.
organization that owns that?
The system is providing an interface to get the information that's managed there. Sure.
Yeah.
Guys, I've got to run. Can I just drop my point and then I'm going?
Yeah, sure.
Which is why? Where do you get from the HI service or the Medicare service someone's sex? Right? You don't.
You get it
their
via
sex.
the B2B interface or HPAS.
You do a query with their demographics, including their sex, and you get back an IHI. So does that mean?
Yeah, though that means that
mean?
it's a valid IHI that can be associated with that particular
The same with
sex.
Medicare. Medicare card doesn't have your sex on it, but you can do an
but
IRN
Medicare
check.
online, yeah. The point, Angus, is that the interfaces provide this information, which is where people are assured that they have the correct IHI with corresponding sex or gender value.
Yeah, I'm worried it's not really from that system. It's people think that's what it is in that system.
No, that's what the system confirms it is via the interface.
Does it?
Yes.
Does IHI have fuzzy matching that if you get the sex wrong but everything else wrong, it's going to go, that IHI is valid?
It does.
So if that is how I understand the service to work, but that's sort of besides the point. The key point is there are sex/gender values in these systems, and thus they are a source of these values and thus appropriate to populate this element.
Yeah, I guess for them it makes sense, but I don't know how
I would. For them, I mean, and any system that's sharing RSG information based on what's come out of the HI service or NHSD or whatever, they can assert that. Otherwise, they have no way of asserting this.
I can assume it.
No, they can assert it because they're actually getting it from those systems.
If I do those systems all my demographics for Angus Miller, but I set it to F because everything else is right, it'll come back and go, that's a valid IHI. It doesn't mean my sex is actually female. It just means everything. You gave me enough information to say that IHI is valid. For me to then assert female because I assumed that everything I gave it were correct is incorrect.
Isn't this about identifying the source of a claim?
Yes.
And so what we want is we've got various sources that provide information or provide assertions, and we want to be able to identify the source.
That's exactly what we're doing.
So we want to identify sources. And so one idea is to identify sources by codes in a code system. Another one would be to identify sources by a URI. Another one would be to identify sources by a device object. So I'm just thinking hypothetically, what are the sorts of ways you can identify a source? And at the moment, we're looking at saying we want to identify sources by codes in a code system.
Yes, that's right.
What I'm disputing.
But what alternative are you proposing, though?
Do you have a proper directory of systems and services, and we reference that?
No, there is no such directory.
Yeah, well, there will be next year, I'm told.
By whom? If you're thinking of the Health Connect directory, that's not going to do that. That holds provider information only.
Yeah, but how can I determine, like, I don't want to maintain a directory of all the
Well,
entities that exist.
we don't have to do all of them. We only have to change this as we have requests to change it, and we would only add things which are valid sources of RSG information.
Yeah,
It's no
I think
different to maintaining the value set of source document types with birth certificates and driver's license or whatever. Yes, it's maintenance, but that is standardization. The alternative will be that people will start populating this with their own codes.
Yeah, I'm not
I put my
sure,
hand
like,
up.
because
How do I put my hand up there?
I'm not sure how, like, if these are not devices, what are they?
They
That's the
are
bit I don't understand.
services. They are services. Or more specifically, they are sources of RSG values that are not document sources. That's how this element's defined in the RSG extension.
But are you reading it off a screen in an application?
Well, it doesn't matter where you're getting it from. The
Oh, it
point is
does,
it's not a
because I want
document.
to know. I want to know where I got it from.
Well, are you making that requirement for?
Well, it's a source,
Yeah,
it's not a
what's the
document. So what is the source? How
well,
did I
that's what the
magically
code
get it?
tells you. It's the record in either the HI service, the NHSD, or whatever.
Yeah,
That's
but
what it's
I want to
telling you
know.
for the individual.
I want to know, like, if it says passport, I know it came from a passport. So it's,
So
I don't understand. Like, I have to be, it's either via an API or it's via a screen or
we discussed this
it's
in the
via
last
from an
work group
organization.
meeting as well. We're not
Yeah.
We need to go
we're not
5-minute
dealing with
warning.
that.
Got it.
Thanks, Danielle.
Yeah.
There is no ambiguity here whether you're getting it from the screen or the API or whatever. It's the value that's held in these systems, in these services.
Yeah. So, but at the end of the day, it's a general organization that's supplying.
It's not an organization, it's a service.
Yeah, but somebody owns that service.
The service may legislatively have an operator, but that's besides the point. That can change. So
Could
look,
I
I think, yeah, sorry,
suggest
Danielle,
at this
go ahead.
point that I don't think we've come to an agreed position on this. I don't think there's a clear majority. I think maybe more work needs to be done. Perhaps we could, perhaps those people who are interested to put forward a position could meet on this between this meeting and the next, and meet with Ruben if you're available, Ruben, to have a discussion to try to move forwards on this.
Yeah, sure, happy to do that. I just want to clarify if Brett's concern is the only concern amongst the attendees or if there are others.
I'm not sure it's a concern, but I would like that the discussion encompasses both the source and the source document and all the source related kind of attributes, and whether they are mutually exclusive. And I understand the need. I think that this would alleviate, which is consistency.
Yes.
If you can just arbitrarily come up with a representation of a source that really doesn't help creating kind of interoperability at the end of the day, to have
right.
some
That's exactly right.
guidance on consistency would be useful. But I'd like to understand where a document and another source, which is non-document, overlap or don't overlap, and how we distinguish them. So, for instance, a passport provided through a passport service would be represented as the document source passport, but not as the service passport service. And so now, for instance, Medicare, when we've got Medicare information as a document, we've got Medicare information now as an online service. and we've got Medicare as an organization, where do we, which pathway would you go in that? And making sure then that we don't have different people picking different pathways because they had a different interpretation.
Okay, that's fair.
Anyway, I'm happy to be part of that conversation.
Okay.
All right.
So I would like to suggest an action item on that then. For the purposes of us scheduling that, can I get the people who are interested in that? And I realize some of you have already spoken up. Could you raise your hands though, so that we can just check that for the purposes of the minutes on whether or not you want to be part of that convo. We've got Brett, we've got Andy, Ruben, I assume you're in.
Yep, I am.
Okay, we can just leave it at that for now. To have that conversation. Personally, I got actually quite excited by what Andy was describing. Admittedly, it sounds to me like this is considered for future use now, so that we can actually do some cool work to do classifications with an actual, like, this is when and how you do these things, and then put that out through a release and test it. I think we might be, for that kind of thing, a bit late in the cycle, but I think that would be great.
I think the stuff Andy was talking about could be for future consideration, but I would like us to establish the population of that source element for this release of AU base.
Let's see where we get to out
Yeah.
of the discussions and what
Sure.
the kind of direction that comes forwards. Yeah, because obviously we also, I think it was mentioned in the last minutes, and just for the purpose of this minutes, we'll reiterate that the intention might be, if we can come to a set of agreed pieces of terminology, to include it in this release, but understanding, depending on how that terminology will be developed and published, that might still put it outside of this release cycle, given that base will be published in January. So there is also that consideration.
Yeah, I think that would be a concern if the artifacts aren't in base, but I think if and my preference would be to have them in base, but we'll discuss this in the meeting. That's fine.
All right. Okay, so Ruben, are you happy to organize that meeting with folks?
Yeah, sure, can do. And
Okay, we'll
thanks
pop
for the
that
tip there,
action on
David.
you.
I will include Angus as well. Thanks.
Okay, so next item. I think I actually have to share my screen at this point. Back to me. Let me just get to where, okay, this is it. Okay, we are on to the task business status content. Who is leading us through? Noting we've really only got about 15 minutes to get through this. Who's leading us through the changes in these items?
I can do that.
Okay, is that you sharing your screen again?
Yeah, I'll share again.
Okay.
I think anyway, so even if this is an opportunity for Andy, and Angus has gone, but at least Andy to see what was done in more detail again. So there's 2 tickets. I think we alluded to these earlier in the earlier meeting, but basically it's rewordings of the task business status set. So we have this code system defined in AU base. There's 2 tickets which are covering all of the concepts here. And yeah, so a meeting was arranged to discuss the definition and the code and the display and the definition to try and have some clarity around that. And yeah, that was also with the acceptance. These are my tickets, that these would be specific in nature where defined as such. So I wouldn't be trying to make them all generic necessarily. And this is kind of where we landed. So probably just, I don't know. I don't know whether we do side by side, but if we go through them one by one. We had booked with display booked and service has been booked. Actually, I might do this. This will be easier. That. Okay, so I think we didn't change the first one. Oh, yes, we did. We changed the display and the code. So the code, since this was referring to specifically to a service, we added service to the description and to the code. So it was about a service being booked, which kind of leaves things open for other kinds of booking. Why don't we just run through them all and then we'll see how much time we've got left.
I wonder if you can just run through the items on the left. I know we're doing a comparison, but we already did that in the last call.
Yep. So I can say,
there are people who, which is fair, because not everybody on the call, I think, was at the last meeting, but most of them were. So I think we could probably just run through the improvements and say where we are.
I can say what, the way we approached it. And I think because one of the things we did was where the definition, whether the definition was referring to the task or to the request, we kind of tried to make that clearer in the definition. So when things were about when things were about a request, we tried to state that in the code and the terms. So we ended up with things like request claimed, request cancelled by the placer, the request has a data issue. And so these, I think this needs, it'll need some parsing probably, and whether the requesting group wants to take these back and kind of work through that. That's kind of where we handled.
So just point of order there, we had the action item to see whether or not the updated descriptions had gone to e-requesting. We've marked that as done. Is that still a to-do? Do I need to untick that?
I'm not sure if it went to co-chairs or not.
Socialized.
But I don't know if it went to the full TAG or not. I think. I suspect
Andy,
not.
are you able
How
to
could we
comment on
find
that?
out?
I have had clashes for the last few meetings on and off, so I couldn't say whether it has or hasn't. We have discussed it at the co-chairs meeting. We have discussed this, but I don't think we've gone through the actual values. To be honest, I'm not too stressed by most of this because the user never sees this. It's more whether, and I don't think there's anything in this that fundamentally removes or adds a concept that was not there before. So I'm really not too perturbed by this. I guess more generally, I do wonder though, where we are looking at capturing these kind of bindings at a level of base and not within, say, diagnostic requesting, when some of this stuff is very, very specific to diagnostic requesting. So a specimen has been collected in a lab collection center. I don't think you're going to see that, for instance, in a medication request task. You're not going to see it in, the other types. So that's, I guess, more my fundamental question, is that having a big collection of task business statuses that you then have access to. I guess that was my main question about this approach.
Okay, thank you, Andy. So that sounds like, as the e-requesting TDG representative, you're comfortable with the level of concept change and don't think that before we vote that we need to take that back to the TDG?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess
So are there any other comments or questions on the concepts? Okay, sorry, let me summarize. The change that's been here is to keep exactly the same set of concepts, but to have the codes, displays, and definitions have what we're marketing as an improvement in the semantic, like conceptualization and definition. Are there any other questions or comments about what is proposed? Okay.
Look, I guess I'm just putting on the table that there are some of these concepts are innately linked to an assumed diagnostic request and fulfillment workflow that may not be applicable outside of the diagnostic requesting workflow. So, I just have not seen, I've not, I mean, the one that comes to my mind is medication request fulfillment, because it's kind of a, something concrete that we kind of already have in play. And obviously I'm pretty sure the agency's looking at a FHIR version of medication management. I'm a little wary of kind of extrapolating from diagnostic requesting and creating this as a foundation and the level of base without having another candidate for kind of comparison at the moment. So things like, for instance, addendum created for reporting. Now, is there a concept of an addendum in another type of request fulfillment? Like, obviously, there's a very particular diagnostic requesting addendum to a report process. But again, what does that mean for communication request? What does it mean for medication request? I don't know. I've never kind of done that level of analysis. That's my query.
Yeah, I think part of it was because some things are more specific where there's kind of allusions to a particular usage. So the fact that it was addendum created for reporting, we said, well, that's addendums to reports. That's what you mean. So we should say that specifically. So
yeah, because it could be an addendum to, for instance, medication request.
Yep. That'll be a different code.
Yeah, and then how do you represent that in terms of fulfillment of medication kind of stuff? We are overlaying communication requests into this as well, because one of the things we do want to track is fulfillment of, say, urgent result reporting. And then, I don't know whether do we harvest from the same
5 minutes
thing? I don't know. Anyway, that's my only thing to note
I think,
in this, because we've only put the effort in around diagnostic requesting. We don't have a broader footprint. So just a caveat at a base level is that none of these things are what's the word I'm looking for? Scoped relative to diagnostic requesting, yet they are by the nature of how they're defined, because that was the only input.
Allow me to make, I guess, a comment on If we don't approve this change, that means those concepts as shown on the right are in base anyway. They're already in. There already is FMM1. So the concepts in and of themselves have already been approved and are going through ballot now for inclusion in base. So I think the question of are they appropriate for base or not has already been voted on, at least for the purpose of this release.
Yeah, so it's really just, yeah, would you take these changes or not is the question. And yeah, because they're in, the code system's in. So I don't know, do you want, like, the question is like, can we resolve this now, take these changes, or is there another thing that has to happen before that?
This doesn't negate that there's been a set of legitimate concerns on whether or not these concepts are appropriate, though that isn't the subject of this ticket. The subject of this ticket is to improve the definition of the existing codes. And I think that we would be looking at a separate change request to remove one or more concepts that are deemed as not appropriate to be handled in a base level code system.
Yeah, and like this is FMM1. So it's like we're just trying to do our best set of codes to actually bring to get into FMM2. Yep.
I mean, that fits my perception of where we've got to at the moment. We've got some polished entries from a set of concepts, and then we've got a question of, well, maybe some of these concepts don't belong here, and so they sound like the two issues we've come up with at the moment.
So we've only got a few minutes left. Coming back to this item, and I think there are two. Are they distinguishable, Brett? Is there a difference in their nature, or are both of the two open JIRAs?
Oh no, yeah, they're the same. Yeah, they're in fact the same issue. I split them with the assumption that we'd split this code system, which didn't happen. But I think the request for the rewording is the same. Yeah, so basically it's covering all of the codes in those two tickets for rewording. Yeah. So there's no difference.
I would like to proceed on considering whether or not the wording improvement can be added, or whether or not it is a wording improvement that is appropriate. But I also think that there is a larger issue that Andy has highlighted that we need to consider. And that would be great if you could raise an issue, Andy, on some of the items that you think should be removed from this code system.
I don't think it's about a remove from the code system. I think this is kind of more fundamental. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here which are diagnostic requesting specific. And my question is really, why isn't the diagnostic requesting TDG defining and owning these as opposed to AU base defining and owning these? Because it seems like pathology in lab is never going to be used outside of diagnostic requesting.
Wouldn't it be used in reporting?
Yeah, diagnostic requesting and reporting it, but that's going to be the TDG, right? They're not going to do that in reporting anyway, to be honest. The task as task business statuses, I don't know where else you would ever report to have a pathology and lab business status associated with a task that isn't in your requesting. And that's then saying, well, where do you draw the line in dragging this kind of stuff back into base? That is kind of.
I think it's a reasonable discussion to say, where do the domains exist? Because like I'd go service booked. I can use that for referrals.
I think we have 1 minute remaining, folks.
Which is going to be the TDG in this case. But can I use that for appointments?
is it's a separate ticket to a degree.
Yeah,
Like this
yeah,
content
yeah.
is, if we do not move and approve this ticket, the content is already in base. That's already happened.
Brett, did you want to state the motion again?
Well, my motion would be to accept this wording as is and resolve that these 2 tickets are addressed by that.
I'm happy to second it.
Okay, there is a motion on the table and Michael Osborne has seconded. Noting for the minutes that we will have captured Andy's concerns about the appropriate scope of these concepts in the first place. Are there any other comments or questions? Okay, hearing none, I will go to the poll. This poll is going to address both the 2 issues that we can see on the screen. There's a FHIR 51894 and a FHIR 51893 by virtue of the concept definition shown on the screen of each of the code, then display, then description. I will share that poll now. You should see that in front of you. Please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain.
+1 affirmative.
Okay. I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I will share the results. We have 6 affirmative, 0 negative, 2 abstain. The motion carries. The wording improvement is, I guess, approved. I think bringing that back to our agenda, I think we actually got through all the ballot items. The next agenda will be advertised. There are 2 items relevant to e-requesting, I believe, on there. We haven't created the page yet. There's also, oh no, we have. Oh,
There's a
okay.
page. Yeah, there's a page where I'm not sure we've populated everything. These were ones we knew were coming back.
Potentially we're going to bring back the sex and guidance, the one on the RSG source code system. And there are 2 common issues that are tagged, if possible, to go into this agenda. If there are any other items that we need to add on to this agenda, please let Brett or I know and we can put that in. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your time today.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing that we got through the whole agenda. Well done, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
All.
Bye.
Cheers all.